Hi everyone, it's Nadia Bergineti from the Child Protection Party. Thank you for joining me for the Sunday night live feed on Monday night. Sorry that we missed it last night. We were a bit busy doing other things, but we're here tonight and I thank you for joining us. Tonight I wanted to talk about social workers, and the reason why this has come up is because of an article that was in the Sunday Mail that Laura Novak, one of our journalists here in Adelaide, wrote about. And how important the role of being a social worker is and how influential that can be, but also how difficult being a social worker can be. So the article talked about many circumstances that social workers found themselves. They talked about a range of things, including homelessness, child protection, drug and alcohol, domestic violence, social workers involved in a whole heap of different social justice issues, and it gave examples of the types of things social workers had to face and how difficult that could be. And just some of the examples that they gave was, some social workers that are involved in the Department for Child Protection, they start their day, they arrive at work, and the first thing that they need to do is they need to deal with a child that has been completely infected from head to toe with lice bites. And I think if you can just picture what that must be like to walk into a home where a little child is completely infected and completely neglected and not being looked after, that must be incredibly difficult to walk into, because I can imagine that I would find that really confronting and difficult if I had to work on the front line in that situation. Another example was where a social worker had to deal with a little boy who had 19 fractures all over his body, and you can just imagine how difficult that would be to just hear about that story, let alone have to see that little boy and know how much pain that little boy must have been in or suffered to have gone through that. So there was another example of social workers going to houses where there was severe neglect and children weren't being fed, and they were following out social workers, and these children were begging these social workers, which would have been from NGO organisations that were in there to try and support a family, begging them to take them home, and these social workers knowing that they had to just walk away and leave those kids because that was beyond what they could do. These types of things must be incredibly difficult and just disheartening for someone to do on a daily basis. Another one was when a social worker worked in a homeless shelter and would be worried all night because a young person had run away from the homeless shelter. So I just want you to imagine these types of things, because a lot of the time on our live feed we do, sometimes we do speak about difficult situations that we find ourselves in, some unethical behaviour that we witness with social workers in the Department for Child Protection. But there's a reason, I believe, that they come to that point. I believe that social workers, and I know because I'm studying social work at the moment, I've got a bachelor's degree in psychology, but I am doing my master's in social work, and I know that innately I want to bring about positive change. I want to make sure that children aren't neglected, aren't physically hurt, aren't harmed in any way. I want children all over Australia, no matter where you live, to have the best outcome. So I know innately that's what I've always been like that. I've always thought that way since I was a kid, something that my parents instilled in me, and I think innately that's how I was, raised and born. It's something that I really feel passionate about, and I think as a social worker, you don't do social work unless you feel like that, because it's a very difficult field to be in. I know that Tony has been doing it for a long time. I don't know, maybe over 20 years that he's been doing it for, and I know when he is struggling, he has had a hard day from the work that he's done. It still impacts him so many years after. So it's not just something that you get involved in, on a whim. Becoming a social worker is something that you're born to do. And I can see that, I've learned so much from Tony in what he has, the types of things he's been involved with, and the way that he's been able to operate himself, and the professionalism he shows. And I just, it's something innately in Tony that makes him operate the way that he does. And I believe that the toll on social workers definitely needs to be managed with adequate supervision, and that's not being done in a lot of organisations. Unfortunately, a lot of organisations are too focused on making money and, ensuring that they're meeting their quotas or their bottom line, that they actually don't focus on the fact that these people that are on the front line really need their supervision, really need to make sure that they can debrief. You know, we've had conversations with ministers and, you know, people higher up in the department, and they actually don't know what supervision means. Supervision means that, you know, a social worker who is going through a difficult time is able to debrief with their, you know, with a colleague and be able to talk through and ensure that whatever they've gone through and whatever they've dealt with for the day is adequately spoken through, and strategies can be developed and ensure that they're okay so they can go home and they don't necessarily take it with them. You know, Tony is my supervisor, so if ever I have a difficult day, and there have been many of those, he can attest to those, I give him a call and I rant to him about it, and we talk about, you know, things that I could have done differently or strategies to put in place, and he's always checking on me to make sure that I'm okay. And Tony has a supervisor. So this is really important, and we need to ensure that these people that are actually working with our most vulnerable and dealing with social justice issue are at their best, not feeling fatigued, because if they are feeling like that, that's going to impact the decisions that they make. And I guess that's why we're so we're pushing, and we're very supportive of South Australia, the legislation that's been put into South Australia to register social workers, because it's absolutely important. You know, if an organisation isn't providing adequate supervision and supporting their staff, then at least there needs to be a board or an external organisation, an external board that can set minimum standards, but also can ensure that the social workers have somewhere to go if they're not receiving the adequate support in their own organisation, or if they feel like something isn't right, they can go to the external organisation who can make sure, you know, that they are supported when they need to deal with any issues within their organisation. So there's things that social workers do suffer from working in this field, and I know that I have in the field that I worked with when I was working at school. But also, you know, I've had many times as a family advocate felt very disheartened or drained or exhausted from a situation. So, you know, social workers can experience something called vicarious trauma, which means that the traumatic experience that is being told to them or they've witnessed can actually, of the person that they're trying to help, can actually transfer over to them. And another thing is they can feel compassion fatigue, which is something that I very much experienced as working in a school. I had very little empathy or compassion for my own family because I was so focused on the people that the little kids that I was working with at school. So I know that this is something that is real and it does happen, and I can just imagine that the social workers that are dealing in the Department for Child Protection or any of the other health services, whether it's housing or homelessness or education, do feel like that, especially if they're not appropriately supported. And so I think it's so important. This is why our organisation is pushing for it. We need to ensure that they are not being burnt out. And I don't think everyone can be a social worker, and I believe that if we actually have these minimum standards, and if we have an external organisation that is actually setting the minimum standards, but also ensuring that universities are teaching social workers exactly what they're going to be exposed to, and making sure that courses in the universities actually deal with issues such as child protection, because we spoke to a uni lecturer recently, and actually the head of the university, who's one of my lecturers, and he's a brilliant lecturer, and he spoke about the fact that recently in the last couple of years they've put in maybe one or two subjects dealing with child protection. Now, the majority of people that finish up their university degree as a social worker will go into the field of child protection, because that seems to be the most jobs. So there needs to be far more emphasis in university dealing with these types of things, because social workers will come out of university green as they're put into these situations where they're dealing with such horrific stories. And I know that the reason why I became involved with the Child Protection Party is because of the story over here in South Australia of the House of Horrors. So that was the first, although I was working in a school and I definitely believed that something had to be done systemically, and I wanted to get into politics for that. That story is what made me feel like this can't continue. We can't allow these children to just be unnoticed. No one noticed for so long that these kids were being treated so horrifically. So for a social worker to have to witness that every day, surely they are feeling this fatigue and this exhaustion, and they're becoming biased towards parents because they've seen such horrific stories, and they've witnessed parents treating their children in a certain way, but not all parents are like that. So I do understand why Families SA was changed here in South Australia to the Department for Child Protection, because I don't think that organisation could distinguish between protecting children and being child focused and supporting families. I think that there was a conflict. I think we saw it with many children who have been hurt, who were under their watch. There have been many children that have been hurt where they haven't, they've been trying to support the family and they weren't child focused enough. So I do understand why they have gone that way. I feel like they've gone a little bit too far that way, but that it does call and does make it really important that we actually have advocates then for families, as we do for kinship carers and foster carers now. The role of an advocate for a family and parents to understand exactly what it is that the department is concerned about, but exactly what they need to do, and ensure that they understand 100% and they are supported and directed towards, these are the types of things that you need to do to prove that you're actually a capable parent and you're actually able to look after these kids better than you have. So I just want to give a bit of a background. It is a really important subject, I think. We're not just saying that we think we need to register social workers because we have a BNAB on it about social workers not being registered. Every field needs to be registered. My husband's a naturopath, and that's another field that is not professionalised, because anybody can be a naturopath just like anyone can be a social worker, which is so dangerous because naturopaths also give advice about medical issues. Instead of taking Western medicine, they can steer you towards alternative medicines, and if they don't understand the complex nature of the human body and reactions that can happen between medications, you're actually putting people into really dangerous situations. And anyone can be a naturopath, which is something that's always frustrated my husband, because he has studied for many years and, he wants the industry to also be professionalised. And social workers are the same. Those of us, and I'm hoping to call myself a social worker, we want to be, this is an incredible field, and there's an incredible sense of justice that we feel, and to be lumped with a brush that is completely opposite to why people become a social worker is not something that people shouldn't feel embarrassed to be a social worker. You should feel like it's a job that's actually providing support to vulnerable people and bringing about change. It shouldn't be something that you're afraid to tell people that you're a social worker because you get lumped with bullying and toxic behaviour. And I've worked with many Department for Child Protection social workers, and even when I haven't always agreed with them, I have seen innately that they very much care about children. I think that a lot of them have been in the industry for too long, and they feel a certain way towards families and kinship carers because they're so focused on the children. And you know what, if they can do that role good, then that's fine, as long as there's somebody else that can support these families. Because everybody is telling you that every piece of literature, every report, every professional, every person in this field, every expert is saying that we need to ensure, the best outcome for children is to be with their biological family. So in most cases, not all, but in most cases. So if we can support these families external to the Department for Child Protection, then I think that is something that should be promoted. If the department isn't able to do that because they can't distinguish, and I think they've proven in the past that they can't, then they need to allow others to come in and do that. And it shouldn't be based on your finances. Tony and I and other advocates who are coming on board, we're receiving a lot of support Australia-wide to be for professionals to come on board with us and to be advocates, which is wonderful. We are not restricted by what we say. Our focus is about the children, but we are not restricted by our any funding, because we have no funding. So we can basically look at a case and we can say that these are the issues, and we can stick to what is in the best interest of the children. Not everybody is able to do that, especially when you've got government funding. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, and it's important for the department to step away a little bit and actually say, okay, you guys need to do your job regardless of what we feel. We need to have your external independent report, and I guess that's an issue that we have, Tony and I, what we've witnessed. Is that we don't necessarily think that there's some impartiality there. There's, not a lot of. I've spoken to a lot of incredible social workers, both within the department, but also resi workers, NGOs working with families, where they have been restricted by what they can actually say and what they can write in their report, or even write in a report, because they're not allowed to. It contradicts with what they've been asked to do. So we definitely feel that this field social workers is an incredible field, and it needs to be professionalised, and we're definitely calling on the legislation to be passed. So here in South Australia, the legislation has been put to the state parliament, and we're hoping that's going to come through, and we're hoping that South Australia is actually going to be the leaders in this, and all the other states are going to follow. It needs to be a national approach, but we are very proud here in South Australia that even though we haven't been involved in it, it has been one of our policies. So we've definitely been pushing for it, but actually the Greens were the ones that put it forward to the state parliament, and we're very much hoping that that's going to come through, because we really think it's really important for social workers to be professionalised here for their own protection, but also for the protection of all the other vulnerable people that they work for. So I really appreciate you all listening today. That's all I really wanted to speak about. I think it's a really important issue, and I'll just have a look if there's anybody else who's asked any questions. If you've got any questions about social workers, please ask. Happy to answer any of your questions. I think Avery and Tony are on, so I'm pretty sure they're answering any questions. And I think the consensus here on the live feed has been that social workers do need to be registered, and so I hope you've all enjoyed the live feed today. Again, sorry that it wasn't yesterday, but Sunday night live feed will be back with Tony next week. So if you've got any questions in the meantime, please ask us. Continue to support our political party, because we are the only political party that's focus is on children's rights, and we're completely child focused. So if you would like to be involved with us in some way, please contact us through our website, and we'll get in contact with you as soon as we can. I really appreciate you being involved, and we'll see you next time. Thank you again. Good night.